Before we go to my first guest, I want to start with a commentary, an important one. I hope you'll indulge me. During his flight to Mozambique, the Pope made some troubling comments that are making headlines. Reacting to a new book, How America Wanted to Change the Pope, by journalist Nicholas Senese, the Pope said, "For me, it's an honor that Americans are attacking me," end quote. This latest book, like a string of lazy articles before it, attempts to make the fraudulent case that an American cabal is determined to take down Pope Francis. Now, this is tired and, frankly, a fact-free narrative that we've heard mostly from European quarters and American progressives for years now. It is predicated on the idea that traditionally minded American Catholics, from columnists to bishops to cardinals to entrepreneurs, even media types like this network, are bent on undermining the papacy of Pope Francis. A column 2 years ago by papal advisor Father Antonio Spadaro sought to promote the fantasy that American Catholicism has been infected by an alliance with fundamentalist Protestants, leading to what he called an ecumenism of hate. Now papal biographer Austin Ivory is strumming that same chord in a forthcoming book titled Wounded Shepherd, which promotes the same foolishness that the Pope's reform agenda is under attack by well-financed traditionalists. Now, while these depictions may be comforting to certain cliques in the Vatican, they are factually and culturally misreading the situation. I know some of them are just trying to defend the Pope, and that's a good impulse, but not by destroying or castigating or demonizing others. They make the mistake of casting Orthodox Catholics in America as right-wingers, players in a political plot to undo the agenda of Francis. The truth is much more simple. American Catholics actually believe what the Church has always taught, and they're loud enough and have big enough platforms to broadcast that belief. They are pro-life, devotional, they love the Church and the Pope. The absurdist guilt by association conspiracy theories that these elite churchmen and so-called journalists used to tie millionaires to media organizations and even publishers and political figures are frankly laughable. Query: if this American cabal is so powerful and well-financed, why does it have absolutely nothing to show for its efforts? Near as I can tell, the progressive winds are blowing pretty powerfully through Rome these days, with appointments, cover-ups, synods going full steam ahead. All traditional Catholics have done is ask questions. The American cabal narrative also fails to take into account criticism from well-known and esteemed European cardinals and thinkers, cardinals like Mueller and Sarah and many others, who've raised theological and historical concerns about this upcoming Amazon Synod, for instance. Are they part of the American cabal too? I guess you don't have to be an American to be part of it. The truth is, this is all a craven attempt to demonize and purge voices from the Church who dare to question the radical changes underway and the brutal tactics used to enact it. Given the sexual and financial corruption in the Church, it's incumbent upon all of us, laity and clergy, to ask questions and demand answers in love. That's true mercy, caring enough to ask the uncomfortable questions. That's all we've ever done here. And for reference, far from the gross characterizations and hit pieces I've read in recent days, this show and this network have only posed legitimate questions, at times hard ones, and we've done so fairly. For instance, on the night that we reported on Archbishop Vigano's testimony and discussed Vigano's suggestion that the Pope resign over his knowledge of the sexual misdeeds of McCarrick and others. These are a few of my comments from August 30th, 2018. Listen. I have to tell you, and you all may disagree, and I'll let you hear, but just very briefly, I'm a little squeamish about the idea of a Pope resigning again. I worry about people suggesting that he should resign. You know, canon law, Father Jerry, there is no mechanism to remove the Pope. He would have to do this of his own authority. No one can do it for him, right?
Yeah, the Pope is not subject to removal by any the cardinals or the bishops. No, the Pope, he enjoys that office until death or resignation.
We need to get some answers here, and I want to get into some of the criticism of Archbishop Vigano, which also demands scrutiny. That's called balanced reporting. I guess I missed the American Cabal memo that day. There is no denying that we are in a crisis point in the Church. Rather than attempting to slander good people like George Weigel or faithful cardinals like Burke, we might all be better served by spending our time looking at reality. Today I pulled some numbers that bear reflection. According to the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, it's a Georgetown Research Institute, looks at church numbers, attendance, and other factors. Attendance at weekly Mass is down from 55% in 1970 to 21% today. There are now 30 million former Catholics in the United States. The number of people identifying as Catholic in 2015 were 81.6 million. By 2017, it was down to 74.3 million. Now, why is this happening? Certainly, the sex abuse crisis and loss of trust is a huge factor. But so are things like belief in the Eucharist, marriage, a celibate clergy. And we must ask those questions, and we will continue to do so. If people wish to criticize traditional Catholics, have at it. They did it to Mother Angelica, John Paul II, Benedict XVI. But let's not demonize people for engaging in dialogue. I thought that's what everyone wanted. Dialogue. Mercy. And let's not create silly conspiracy theories in an effort to dismiss their concerns or questions. Most of these traditional Catholics have deep reverence for the office and the person of the Pope. And like the saints of old, they are, to the best of their ability, trying to keep him from making tragic mistakes or from being deceived by voices with their own agendas. In days gone by, this might even have been seen as a merciful act. And maybe it still is. Here now to discuss all of this and more is the editor of Catholic World News and fellow at Thomas More College, Philip Lawler, joining us from New Hampshire. Phil, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, this week, Slate magazine released an interview with Theodore McCarrick. It is the first interview since McCarrick was laicized last summer after the Vatican announced in June of 2018 that he had been suspended for credible charges of molesting a minor. Later reports revealed that he had also abused other minors and sexually harassed seminarians. Now, in this interview, when asked if he had done what he was accused of, McCarrick said this: "I'm not as bad as they paint me. I do not believe that I did the thing that they accused me of," end quote. Now, what do you make of that response? I mean, you either know you did something or you don't.
Exactly. It's a very strange response, and the interview is a strange interview. To be honest, my guess is that the reporter didn't think she was going to get the interview and was as surprised as anybody else when McCarrick agreed to sit down with her. But he spoke about himself almost in the third person. And as you say, it's odd that he would say, "I don't believe that I would do that sort of thing." Either you would or you wouldn't. I mean, if you ask me, did I have a chocolate shake yesterday, I might say I don't believe I did because I don't really recall. But it's the sort of thing I might do. You know, if you ask me if I raped someone, I say no.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what he said. You know, I don't believe I did it. And my first thought was, I'll bet his victims have a very clear memory of what he did or didn't do. Why do you think he even gave this interview, Phil? I mean, interviewer Ruth Graham notes that there was one accusation that he wanted to discuss specifically, and he raised the incident before she could even ask about it. James Gryan's allegation that McCarrick groped him while hearing his confession was the incident. Now, Gryan is the man who credibly accused McCarrick of abuse beginning at the age of 11, and this would eventually lead to his defrocking. McCarrick said this, then I want your reaction. "The thing about the confession, it's a horrible thing," he said, sounding suddenly more urgent. "I was a priest for 60 years, and I would never have done anything like that. That was horrible, to take the Holy Sacrament and to make it a sinful thing," end quote. Why bring that incident up?
Again, it's very odd. And of course, at the age of a man like McCarrick, you can't dismiss the possibility that his intellectual faculties aren't what they once were. But again, it's just an odd reaction that he brought this up He's denying it, of course, and he's denying desecrating the sacrament, and I can certainly understand why that would make him particularly exercised. But the form of the denial, again, strikes me as just off. It strikes an odd note. When he says, that was a terrible thing.
Right.
Is he saying that was a terrible thing to accuse him? Or is he saying that was a terrible thing that was, in fact, done? I don't know.
In response to the interview, Grine, the victim here, had this to say in a separate interview. I'm hoping McCarrick is not abusing children and adults in Kansas. His denials are still the same as he told me. Who will ever believe you? Now, Phil, we should tell the audience, McCarrick continues to live in this monastery in Kansas. The friars, through their generosity of their hearts, have allowed him to stay, even though he's no longer a cardinal or a priest. Your thoughts on this victim coming out and making the suggestion that he's lying to all of us?
Well, there's enough evidence piled up against McCarrick to force the Vatican to act against him. I don't have any hard evidence myself, but I feel quite confident that the disciplinary action, the very harsh disciplinary action that was taken, would not have been taken without abundant evidence. And it's not just the evidence of one victim. You and I heard the rumors long ago. They were just rumors, at least to me, but the Vatican didn't work on rumors. There was hard evidence against him, and these denials are more than a little bit pathetic at this point. They certainly don't show a sign of reparation, of contrition.
Yeah. Well, it's been over a year since the McCarrick story broke, Phil Lawler, and a year since the Vigano testimony came out. Do you think we'll ever get a full accounting of what happened with McCarrick, who was involved, who knew, and a full investigation of the Vigano charges by the Vatican?
Well, we do have the promise from the Vatican that we'll get a full explanation, don't we? And that promise is most of a year old, too, and I haven't seen any action at all on that promise. Now, a lot of the evidence, we know where it is or where it should be. It should be in the archives of the Apostolic Nuncio in Washington or in the Congregation for Bishops in Rome. That evidence should be there unless it's gone through the shredder. And it shouldn't have taken all this long time to come up with the documents from those archives. So we are being stonewalled. There's just no question about it.
Yeah. I want to move to another story here in the United States. Last month in the Diocese of Buffalo, New York, the dean of seminarians there resigned from Christ the King Seminary, and he called for his bishop, Bishop Richard Malone, to resign due to the cover-up culture of abuse he claimed was ongoing there. Now, this week, Bishop Malone is again at the center of controversy, this time in recordings made by his personal secretary, a Father Rizard Biernat. Now, during one-on-one meetings between the two, Malone repeatedly speaks on tape about a seminarian at Christ the King Cathedral and claims of sexual harassment by a diocesan priest, a Father Jeffrey Nowak, who until recently served as a pastor in a suburb of Buffalo. Take a listen. This is Bishop Malone.
We're in a true crisis situation. True crisis. And everyone in the office is convinced this could be the end for me as bishop. With all else that's going on in the diocese and all the attacks on my credibility, that I've known that something's going on here that shouldn't be, and I let it go. I mean, this is a disaster.
Phil, he acknowledges there on tape that he knew something was going on in the seminary, but seems to be more worried about his reputation. The accused priest, Father Nowak, by the way, was allowed to remain in ministry until last month when he refused to undergo a behavioral assessment. The bishop considered Nowak to be sick, and the diocese said it was, quote, aware of no behavior that threatened harm to the public. What's going on here?
Well, what's going on, I'm afraid, is what Bishop Malone said in that recorded interview, or in that conversation, the recording of which we've now obtained through the news media, that he's saying that if this came out, it would be the end of his career as a bishop, and it came out. But his career as a bishop hasn't ended, which there's something wrong there. I mean, it's clear he was covering something up. It's clear he understood the gravity of it. He understood the damage that this would do to his authority. And not only did he continue to try to cover it up, but he's continuing now to sort of backpedal. And as he said, I still feel strong. I don't know why he would feel strong at this point.
Well, there's even a recording of him, a latter recording. We don't have time to play it, but he claims there that he knew this priest was dangerous. He says this Father Nowak was dangerous on tape. There seems to be a pattern of looking the other way when seminarians are involved. This is not unlike the McCarrick situation.
It isn't, and it's not unlike other situations where if the victim is an adult, a legal adult above the age of 18, the bishops look the other way. It's also not unlike a score of other situations where you see a bishop who's discussing a priest saying the priest is dangerous, and you wonder, is he saying he's dangerous to children or that he's dangerous to the bishop's own credibility? Because that seems to be what is uppermost in his mind.
I've got to move on to some important appointments. This past Sunday, Pope Francis unexpectedly named 13 new members of the College of Cardinals, 10 of whom will be eligible to vote in the next conclave. Now, Francis has again chosen men from the peripheries of the developing world, including Indonesia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Cuba, Morocco. In addition, he has chosen men who are supportive of issues close to his heart, such as migration, the environment, a diplomatic stance toward Islam. He has now chosen 67 of the electors who will vote for the next pope. Before we run through a few of these cardinals individually, what's the overall message here, Phil Lawler?
The message, I would say, is consistent with a message that has been coming out of the Vatican in the last month or so. It's a sort of shift from, you might say, a soft sell to a hard sell. In the past, I've thought that Pope Francis was working to consolidate his own power and to ensure change within the church that goes beyond his own reign, but doing so more or less subtly. In the last several weeks, it hasn't been subtle. We've seen the purge at the John Paul II Institute, which was not subtle. Now we've seen the appointment of new cardinals who are clearly aligned with his way of thinking on very controversial issues, and none who is not aligned with him. It's not subtle. It's a move to pack the court, if you will, to ensure that the College of Cardinals next time around will have a majority who think the same way that he does.
Cardinal designate Archbishop Matteo Zuppi of Bologna is one of those cardinal designees. He wrote a foreword to Father James Martin's book, advocating a change in church attitudes towards homosexuality. Although his supporters say his position is more nuanced than Father Martin has made it out to be, how do you see this appointment?
It's significant that he's one of the few bishops of major European sees who is on the list this time around. He's an Italian, and the Italian episcopate is already overrepresented. So this is a significant appointment, and the fact that the Cardinal Designate wrote the introduction to Father Martin's book says it all for me, that he is open to new attitude, to a change in the Church's teachings on homosexuality.
Archbishop Jose Tolentino de Medonca, he wrote a laudatory introduction. He's another one of these cardinal designates. He wrote a laudatory introduction to a book by a Sister Maria Teresa Forcada. Now, she is a rather notorious nun who supports legal abortion and women's ordination and has been dubbed by the BBC Europe's most radical nun. Now, the Pope has repeatedly said abortion is a sin and not accepted by the Church. Why appoint someone who supports these views as a cardinal?
Again, it's a turn to the left. Clearly, you have, in these two cardinal designates that you've mentioned, you have leading representatives of what you might call the liberal bloc in the European bishops' world. And that's the way that these appointments are trending. And that's the way the Pope wants the church trending. It's hard to see any other way to read this.
I also want to mention another cardinal designee, the current president of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, Bishop Miguel Angel Ayuso Guillot. Now, he will receive a red hat. He was heavily involved with drawing up that document on human fraternity that in February was signed by the Pope and the Grand Imam. That stated that, quote, diversity of religions is willed by God. What does that appointment mean to you?
It means we have a new line, or the Pope is supporting a new, stronger line. When I say a stronger line in Catholic Islamic relations, and when I say stronger, I mean a stronger desire to have interfaith relations with Islam, even at the cost of some traditional Catholic teachings. And along with the appointment of this new cardinal, we have another, Michael Fitzgerald, Archbishop Michael Fitzgerald, who is too old to be involved in a papal conclave, but he was essentially exiled from Rome by Pope Benedict because he went too far in dialogue with Islam. Right. Now he's being rehabilitated, and that's a crystal clear sign of a new trend. And again, a sharp veer to the left in Vatican policy. Yeah,
the Undersecretary of Human Development, also not a bishop, by the way, Father Michael Chersny. He as well has been elevated to the cardinalatial office, will be an elector in the next conclave. He is really responsible for migrants and refugees and the Church's policy on that. Clearly another indication that, you know, this is someone who thinks like the Pope, and the Pope has been very outspoken on these issues in the past.
Yes, and remarkable appointment because, of course, it's a clear sign of the Pope's interest in the issue of migration, but it's also remarkable in that he's not a bishop, he's a priest. He's an undersecretary of a Vatican office. It's completely unprecedented, I think, to have someone be made a cardinal who is not the head of a Vatican office. So this is a very, very clear sign.
Before I let you go, I've got to touch on what I mentioned in my commentary earlier. Pope Francis was presented with a book on the papal plane this week by French journalist Nicolas Seneze, and it's entitled How America Wanted to Change the Pope. It was published in France on Wednesday. It claims to detail the opposition to Pope Francis, which Seneze says comes from a small minority in the United States, including Cardinal Raymond Burke, Archbishop Charles Chaput, Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, not an American, as well as wealthy lay people like Tim Bush and U.S. Catholic authors like George Weigel. They even mentioned U.S. Catholic media, which probably includes us. Francis said that he was honored by the fact that a group of traditional Catholics from the U.S. attacked him. Then he handed the book to an aide and said, "This is a bombshell." How do you interpret that exchange? What should we read into that?
It's one of those unscripted exchanges that really tells a lot about when someone is thinking. And I gather the Pope made this remark to the author, to Nicolas Seneze, and it happened that there were a couple of dozen reporters within earshot, so it's not the sort of statement that the Vatican can deny. Everybody heard it. And it was unscripted, and that's when I think one tends to say what's really on one's mind. Now, the Vatican put out an explanation saying that the Pope was just saying he's honored by criticism, but that really doesn't make sense because the book that he's reacting to isn't saying that the Pope has critics in the U.S. He's saying that the book is saying there's a conspiracy against the Pope in the U.S. And the Pope is saying that he's anxious to read the book. He's anxious to look into that conspiracy theory. That it suggests a sort of us-them mentality that's really very troublesome.
Yeah, well, it's deeply troubling, and I am concerned because in the Catholic mind, salvation is what should be central, certainly in the minds of clerics, bishops, cardinals, and popes, not settling scores or political allegiances or these tertiary issues on the edges. And it seems there's a lot of politicizing of what should be central beliefs and things that we all hold dear. I also have to get your quick reaction, just getting this in. The Pope also, during that flight to Mozambique, was asked about Cardinal Gerhard Mueller, the former CDF chief, and he said he's a good man, but he's like a child. Your thoughts on that before I let you go?
I hadn't heard that. That's new to me, and it's remarkable. I suppose it could be interpreted as saying he has the simplicity of a child, but Cardinal Mueller is a serious theologian, and to suggest that he's childish in any other way is insulting, and it's indicative, once again, of what I said earlier, that the Pope's policy seems to have taken a turn towards the hard line and an us versus them, and it's, again, very troublesome.
Yeah, well, let's hope that is not the case, and that unity can be found here in the diversity within the Church. Philip Lawler, I thank you for being here. Your book, The Smoke of Satan, is available at bookstores everywhere and online.